Welcome, Rockstars, to why Flamigo is the worst Pokemon design to ever exist. Now, if you saw my top 5 worst designs of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, you kind of already know that this was the top of the list. Now, before all of you Flamigo supporters go yell at me in the comments, let's go ahead and explain why it's the worst Pokemon design to ever exist. Let's go ahead and start off with the easy ones and go ahead and get them out of the way. The name of this Pokemon is literally a single letter different from its in real life inspiration of a flamingo. Flamingo. It's kind of ridiculous. Even with Pokemon like Klefki or Trubbish, even Chandelure's names, they weren't just nothing with one letter taken away, like Key with no Y or Trash with no H, and it was Trush, instead of Trash. There were more letters. They didn't just remove a single letter. It's kind of ridiculous, actually. I mean, at least because Trubbish used to be one of my least favorite Pokemon along with Klefki, but at least they had the word Clef put in front of it and changed Trash to Trush and added the Bubbish at the end. That's different, but they literally just got rid of the end for Flamingo to Flamigo. Secondly, let's go ahead and talk about the way this Pokemon looks. You know those plastic little flamingos that people have in their yards? Yeah? Let me know in the comments down below if you've ever seen or had any of them. Well, they look basically just like that or real flamingos. There's no difference in comparison, really. Like, are you kidding me? They couldn't have been like red or green instead of just the plain old pink. I mean, at least like back in Gen 1, Meowth had a gold coin on top of its head, and that makes more sense. And the reason I say that is because that's Generation 1. That was in the 90s. It made a lot more sense that their inspiration was a lot more direct from real life things, So Meowth was just a cat with a gold coin, but it was different. This is literally the exact same physical design. Like, why? It makes no sense. Like, the earlier gens make sense to have more physical and direct similarities, but the later gens should be a little bit more diverse. Like, base evolutions are a little different. Like, Littenden to Incineroar would be a good example of that, because it starts out as basically just a red and black cat, which is obviously something we don't see, but it is just a cat that's a different color. But eventually, as it evolves, it turns into something else for the most part. So the evolution thing also just doesn't happen because Flamigo doesn't evolve whatsoever. So that's kind of out of the picture as well. Now, third, and this is the one that really kind of bothers me a lot, and it's the typing of Flamigo overall. Now, before you guys get any ideas, I have no problem with the fighting, flying typing. I actually think it's a really cool typing, and especially as a fan of Hawlucha, but there was an issue with this. See, because Flamigo looks literally just like a flamingo, it's kind of hard to believe that with its wings, with no hands on the end of them, like Hawlucha, and our simple fact that it has twig legs make it a fighting type, it makes it a bit harder to actually kind of concept that picture. See, when I think of a fighting type, different things come to mind. Physically, a fighting type Pokemon would appear more physically built or lean, kind of like a Machamp, Now, there always are exceptions, and plus, this is not always the case, and that's with literally absolutely anything in the world. But Pokemon like Metachan, Kabufa, I don't know how to say the name all of a sudden, but Kabufa, yeah, whatever, and Timber all show some type of similarish design, but each had their own way of still showing that they were a fighting type in an aura, appearance, or some type of representation of that. So, because they all had a smaller physical build still, but you could tell that they were fighting types. Kubfu, and that's how you say his name. I completely forgot it there for a second, but like Kubfu was a bit more of a darker color, and when you look at him, it kind of like he has like a ninja, like, or fighting wrestler, like, stance with his fur, with the different colors and the way it's like put to the back right, like he's got a headband on, like Naruto or something, That's kind of the representation you get when I look at Kubfu. Timber obviously is a shorter Pokemon. When he evolves, it's a lot more obvious, but he still is holding his item, his log or that steel item, his steel bar or whatever. That obviously shows he's a more physical attacker, obviously, because he's got that item with him. But on top of that as well, when you just look at his physical appearance, you can see that he's got a bit more of a natural, just angry face, basically, and his upper shoulders are much more built in comparison to the lower half of his body, showing that he has upper body strength. So with those two different things, it really shows that he's a fighting type as well. So they have their aesthetics that show and represent they're still fighting types. For a more direct comparison, like I said before, Hawlucha has a similar outfit costume type thing to like a Mexican wrestler with the way his head is designed. They even kind of referenced it in the X and Y anime for the semifinal. It wasn't the semifinals, but it was the Kalos League, and he had an actual costume before Hawlucha came in, but that's his actual design itself. It naturally feels like that. So that's a representation, but on top of that, his actual upper body, like Timber, is more bulky. Plus, he has the hands with claws, or whatever you want to call them, at the end of his wings. So that shows his possibility with diversity and examples of what he could do with that possible upper body strength, and it's not just a flap of feathers. Okay, let's actually get into the battle implications with this Pokemon. Now, to be fair, overall, its base attack stat, which is 115, is actually a pretty usable stat-wise, but not stellar in today's standards, actually, at all. So it makes it a bit harder to use. Now, in comparison to someone like Metachan, we're going to bring up again, Metachan is a great Pokemon, but it has one of the lower attack stats for a fighting type, and that might be also because he has, you know, the psychic typing, but he has a 60 base attack, which is extremely low, but his ability makes it double, which is 120, and that's still 5 points base higher than the overall 115, and that's just something really interesting to think about, that even with, obviously, that's the whole point of Metachan, that he's downfall to be brought back up by the ability. It's kind of like how a Azumarill is useless without huge power. It's really interesting that this Pokemon it doesn't have the stats to back up what it needs, and it doesn't evolve, so it doesn't get any stat buffs from evolving. Now, overall, Flamigo actually has an option of 3 different abilities: Co-Star, Scrappy, and Tangled Feet. Co-Star is the newer ability, so let's go ahead and start there, and overall, I don't think it's the best personally. See, what Co-Star does is when you're switching in with the Pokemon that has it, it copies the ally stat changes, which could be helpful, I guess, if you're in a similar battle style, like with the speedy special attacker with the speedy special attacker, but if we're going to do Flamigo, it would probably be a physical attacker overall that you would need with them. But that's kind of hard to deal with overall, because in reality, a Pokemon trainer is going to set up a diverse team with a tank, a healer, a Stallmon, you know, all these different things. And so when you're switching out, you could get these different stat changes, and technically it could be helpful if you switch out from a defensive ally mon into Flamigo. That actually gives him a chance to set up, because Flamigo doesn't have any stats whatsoever outside of his attack. He's got no speed, so he's not speedy physical attacker, so he's not going to outspeed anyone with 90, which is lower than a base average for speed Pokemon, so he's definitely going to get outspeed a lot, which is absolutely insane considering he has no defense or special defense. So that means his setup moves, because he has an overall good move diversity pool with high moves like Brave Bird or Close Combat, high power, but at the same time, he's not going to outspeed to get those moves off, and then he's going to get one shot. Plus, he has moves to options like U-Turn or Sword Stance or even Agility. A lot of those are setup moves outside of just counter priority moves like U-Turn, but he wouldn't have the chance to use Agility or Sword Stance because of the stats are so low on his base stats. So yeah, that could work out a way with Co-Star, because switching those could technically work, but that seems like you would have to plan for that so specifically with that ability. It's almost not worth it. It would be more like, it'd be more useful maybe in a cage lock type style, but in regular Pokemon play for 80% of users, I don't see how it have any real use. Not giving the speed to Flamigo makes it so much worse than it was, because if you take out all the physical designs and appearances of it and you just take its stats and everything, if you had given it like 20 more base speed, it's a solid Pokemon overall. It has one really good ability and 2 others that aren't worth it, but it's really hard to concept in that mind. But the other useless ability outside of Co-Star is definitely got to be Tangled Feet. I like Scrappy, it's useful for it, and we'll get into that in a second, but Tangled Feet is an ability that, if you don't know, when a Pokemon is confused, its ability is actually to raise their evasiveness by double. So whatever that Pokemon's evasiveness is to avoid things, it's doubled in that consistency. In reality, I've never known a Pokemon trainer, for the most part, to actually be okay with confusing their Pokemon. It comes with too many disadvantages. You hurt yourself taking extra damage, and you don't get damage on the other Pokemon on the turn, and you don't get to do setups or healing or whatever you might need to do in that turn, and you have to actually battle and not just heal stall if you want to be able to get out of your confusion, if you don't have a confusion healing item, which at that point would get rid of the purpose of the ability. So I don't see how that's ever been worth it, and I've never been a fan of this ability. Now, the absolute final ability that Flamigo has the option to is Scrappy, which, if you don't know, Scrappy has the ability to allow fighting type Pokemon to actually hit ghost type Pokemon with fighting type moves. This is an absolutely amazing, and I mean amazing, ability for this Pokemon. No jokes. To have a fighting type to be able to hit a ghost type makes so many things so much easier, especially for things like Nuzlocke. So obviously this outside obviously took IRL inspiration from Flamingo, but obviously the inspiration from Pokemon were things like, it's not Cubfu, it's Pangoro, those other abilities for Scrappy to have that, but I feel like it just doesn't bring out its most options, you know? Using this ability is absolutely helpful. It absolutely makes Flamigo a much more diverse, and ability to be able to use him is much higher with this, but at the same time, because of its overall stats, I still don't think it's worth it. But Scrappy is definitely the ability you want to run if you want to run this Flamigo Pokemon. I don't think it's worth running learning any other ability outside of Scrappy, and I would just trade it if you don't have it. Now, outside the differences of typings when terraforming or terrestrialization, however you want to say it, comes into Evolve, because that would take a lot to really know the possibilities of that. You would have to dive into that so externally deep and compare different terraforms to other terraforms and how all the stat changes. And so we're gonna stick to just the typings for that. So overall, it has the possibility of a fighting, obviously, and I think maybe a steel. So yeah, so fighting and steel overall pretty cool. Actually, the steel could give a lot of weaknesses and buffers to Flamigo's original typing and whatnot, and it could actually be extremely useful. But I mean, at the same time, any Pokemon can Terra Evolve in this Paldean region, right? Every single Pokemon in this region can terraform. So why not just get a Pokemon with higher base stats, where even if it doesn't have a secondary typing like flying, fighting to steel, if it terraforms, it still gets that stat boost and it still has an overall higher stat. So why not just go with the stronger Pokemon overall anyways? I don't understand why you wouldn't. But I mean, I guess if one bonus that is, if you do win with Flamigo, you can say you beat someone with a lawn ornament at least, right? No, that joke didn't land. Anyways, that's about all that I have to actually dump on Flamigo. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about the Pokemon. Whatever you disagree with me and everything in the comments, it's completely acceptable for you guys to be like that. Just try to remember, respect the conversations, respect the people in the comments and everything. I do have my chat guideline rules for comments as always, but make sure you guys do leave a like, comment, subscribe if you did, and I'll see you guys all next time, Rockstars. Peace.